On the night of September 10th, 1982, police in Rome, Georgia receive a frantic call from Ken Dooley. A unit is dispatched to his home.
The shooting at Ken Dooley's house began with a phone call.
Hello?
You're gonna pay.
A few minutes later, 4 shots slammed into Ken's house.
Police collect several bullets and canvass the area, but there are no witnesses to the crime.
If it's a one-time incident, unless you know who committed the crime, unless you have got specific information about the vehicle leaving the scene, it's very difficult to later on identify who committed that crime.
The following night, at midnight, police are called to the residence of Linda Adair.
There was a phone call. Someone asked for Linda. And then not long after that, there was a firebombing at the house. Nothing like this had happened in her life. And while the police were there, they began to question people, look around. And at that point, someone, a neighbor, came and said that they had seen a car go by slowly. There was a man driving the car, and there was a young woman with brown hair.
Police look for connections between the victims and learn that Linda Adair and Ken Dooley both work for the Rome Youth Development Center, also known as the YDC.
Well, the YDC is a holding facility for juveniles under the age of 17. Adults go to jail. YDC is where a juvenile is detained.
Shortly after the attack on Linda Adair's home, police receive an anonymous call.
Floyd County 911.
Yes, I'm calling about the shooting at Ken Dooley's house last night and the firebombing of Linda Adair's house tonight. For the sex abuse I went through in the YDC, they are both going to die.
Ken Dooley and Linda Adair are brought down to the police station the next morning to listen to a recording of the call.
For the sex abuse I went through in the YDC, they are both going to die.
Police question them about the caller's accusations.
These abuse claims were very thoroughly investigated. It was a serious accusation. There are a lot of girls in the YDC, and there are certainly occasions for abuse. They were not able to authenticate any accusations.
With nothing further to go on, the case goes cold. On the evening of September 25th, 1982, Rome police receive a call regarding a missing girl. 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken was at the mall with several girls and her house parent from a home for neglected children when she disappeared.
The sort of life that Lisa Ann Milliken had was a sad life by any measure. She was only 13 years old, and the problems in her home were such that she had already been removed from it 4 times.
After a search of the mall comes up empty, police interview Lisa's parents, as well as several of the home's residents and employees. None of them know Lisa's whereabouts.
Because of the conditions of Lisa's life, and because she'd been placed in a girl's home, the police thought that she had certainly run away.
Not unique or unusual. That happens quite frequently. Kid will run away somewhere, or an adult, or she most likely was going home.
3 days after Lisa Milliken goes missing, another anonymous call comes into the police department.
Y'all looking for Lisa Ann Milliken? I can tell you where she is. Go up to Little River Canyon in Alabama. Just as you cross the Little River Canyon Bridge, go up into the national park and look off this side of the canyon where there's a power line going across it, and look straight down the canyon. And you'll find her where I left her.
It was a strange call. It really was. And I mean, you don't get people calling in ever very often saying, you know, you go to a certain place, you'll find somebody where I put them and I left them there. That's rare. That doesn't happen every day.
The Rome police immediately notify authorities in Alabama.
Uniformed deputies were dispatched to that location, and I think they were accompanied by an Alabama state trooper. Initially, when they looked over into the canyon, they didn't see anything. They reported back that they didn't have any contact and left the scene.
Police assume the call was a prank. A day later, the DeKalb County, Alabama police receive a call from the same female caller.
Go to the canyon where the power lines cross, and you will find a body with a bullet in it.
DeKalb officers go back to Little River Canyon. Again, they find nothing and depart the scene.
I had left my car a little further than the rest of them. So when they departed, of course, I had to walk 5-6 minutes to get back to my car. And just on the rim of the canyon, there was a tree. And I reached out and got the tree with my right hand, held a flashlight in the left, and helped my hand out over the rim of the canyon. I did it. The spot of the light was right in the back of the young girl.
If you walk up to the edge, you're looking down, but the edge extends out just a little bit, so when the body was thrown off or pushed off the canyon, it ultimately ended up sort of back up under the ledge. You had to actually lean out and look over to be able to see it.
On September 29th, 1982, Lisa Milliken's body is found 35 miles from the mall where she disappeared.
We have a lot of evidence of killers who enjoy having their victims found so that they can see it reported in the newspapers, and because it helps them to glory in it. What good is it to have a victim that nobody knows about?
As far as that particular moment, I think everybody was shocked. We're, of course, in a small town in rural North Alabama, and it's just, you don't see those crimes around here. That's something that you always hear about somewhere else, and it was just a tragedy.
Puncture wounds are visible on her neck, along with a bullet hole in her back.
About 50 feet from where the body was, we found a hand towel, a white hand towel, and inside that was 2 or 3 hypodermic syringes, and there was a pair of blue jeans in that same general area.
Police collect the evidence. An autopsy is performed on Lisa Milliken's body, and the syringes and the pair of jeans are sent to the forensics lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, investigators from Alabama and Georgia joined forces to find Lisa Ann Milliken's killer. Authorities focus on their most promising piece of evidence, the tapes of the female caller who called both jurisdictions.
We had found a report that had been filed back in September. It was a female caller reporting a firebombing and a shooting into a residence of some employees of the YDC there in Rome. That's the same as what had called in our case. And we were able to retrieve those tapes, sit down and physically listen to both of them.
It is the same person who called regarding Lisa Milliken.
You know, you kind of think, well, you know, how does this hook together? Of course, it seems that the common denominator is the Youth Development Center. Sounds like a young girl. Lisa Ann Milligan's a young girl. That's kind of where we concentrate on. Maybe the girls that we've gone through there in the last, you know, I guess immediate past.
And then you start pulling all the puzzle pieces together. Then you're going to go to your juvenile records, and you're going to pull in information and look at information to see if anything might fit in as a part of this puzzle. And so I'm looking at youth that might have been angry, youth that might have a reason to want to get back at the system. Anybody that's got that kind of grudge, I start looking through my files. And I start looking at all my cards and my case files, and I pull that information out. And one of the names that stands out is Judith Neely. Judith and Alvin Neely.
In the fall of 1982, a rash of criminal activity has hit the town of Rome, Georgia, targeting staff members of the Youth Development Center and culminating in the murder of 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milligan. Authorities suspect 18-year-old Judith Neely and her 29-year-old husband, Alvin.
Judith and Alvin's name stand out to me because of what they did previously, but because of their mobility, and because they hadn't been just to Rome, but they had been to other cities and they traveled around. They were separated here. Her children were removed from her here. She had been in YDC here. They had the opportunity and they had the ability to move around freely to do these different things.
Judith Neely is born Judith Adams on June 7, 1964, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Judith Neely's early life was typical of girls of her age and the Southern working class. She was a good student. There was no reason to believe that her life would not go quite well, and that she would have a good, solid, ordinary life.
When Judith is 9 years old, her father is killed in a motorcycle accident, shattering her idyllic life.
This changed the circumstances of the family quite a bit. From now on, things deteriorated and spiraled down.
Judith's mother adopts a highly uninhibited lifestyle, spending her days meeting men over her CB radio and inviting them over for sexual trysts. This does not go unnoticed by the young and impressionable Judith.
Her mother appeared to have been a very promiscuous woman. If Judith was a reactive sort of personality or overly sensitive, she could have felt neglected, she could have been angry, and she could have stored that anger away until she could herself take it out on somebody else.
Alvin Neely's early days were much different.
Alvin Neely's early life was rather charmed. He was loved by his family. He did not have an abused childhood whatsoever. He was greatly liked in school, greatly liked by both his teachers and his fellow students. He lived a very good life.
But he soon turned to a life of crime.
Alvin was a sort of a petty criminal, I would say, nothing really serious. I think he was the type of person who just simply never got up in the morning and asked himself, how can I make an honest living? I think he could have lived his life in small cons, writing bad checks, skipping out on rent, robbing convenience stores, those kinds of crimes.
It is during one of Judith's mother's rendezvous that the 15-year-old meets Alvin, 11 years her senior.
He said that the minute he saw her, he fell absolutely in love, that sparks absolutely flew. The same seems to be true of Judith.
He offered her this sense of an older male who had figured out a way to buck the system and to live a life that she saw as exciting, a life of crime.
Judith soon becomes pregnant. On July 14, 1980, One day before his 27th birthday, Alvin and 16-year-old Judith marry in Ringgold, Georgia. Judith and Alvin live in a number of different motels, robbing convenience stores as they move from town to town.
Their relationship became an outlaw relationship, one forged in an outlaw life, which they both romanticized.
There was nobody to act as the parent and say, enough is enough. And as a result, they just continued to do what they were doing. Typically for people who repeat their crimes, especially if those crimes are exciting to them, they get addicted to a certain pattern. They want more. They're getting away with things. So pretty soon, that's not enough. And they get more and more aggressive.
The Neelys first come to the attention of the Rome authorities in the fall of 1980.
We didn't see 16-year-old, 9-month pregnant teenagers committing armed robberies.
The following day, Judith is arrested for trying to pass a stolen check. She is put in the custody of the YDC.
You're more likely to see a man committing the offense and maybe a female as in a secondary role. But in this case, Judith Neely was the primary aggressor and very much 9 months pregnant. In fact, she gave birth 2 days after the robbery occurred.
Custody of Judith's newborn twins is given to Alvin's mother.
I remember thinking, wow, this young girl, oh, golly, I mean, how was she raised or what's happened to her in life? Because she was venomous.
Alvin is also arrested for the armed robbery for driving Judith to and from the scene. He is convicted and sentenced to up to 5 years in jail. During their separation, Judith writes Alvin letters telling him she detests the YDC staff. She also makes some shocking allegations.
She began to say that she was being raped there, that she was suffering all manner of sexual abuse, that people would not let her write to him. And I think she used this to make him jealous. He began to make promises to her of revenge when she was finally released.
The Neely couple seemed to have had the kind of relationship where one of them instigated an act and the other went along with it. And so they had this sort of psychopathic chemistry.
She was an angry young woman, yet she could manipulate so well.
Judith is released from custody in November of 1981. Alvin follows in April of 1982, and the two resume their life together.
They began to fancy themselves as a criminal couple. They drove around in 2 cars, communicating by CB. He was Night Rider, she was Lady Sundown. They were vagabond criminals looking for that sort of hole-in-the-wall gang atmosphere, some place that they could go and live out this criminal fantasy.
Their fantasy life soon gives way to some very real, dark thoughts regarding the Youth Development Center.
She had made these terrible accusations. Alvin had responded with visions of revenge. They had goaded themselves up to some kind of vengeful action against their enemies in the YDC. And when you've talked it and talked it and talked it and talked it, you finally have to do something. And so they did.
In this case, we have a person driving it who's also very angry and wants to hurt other people. And so it's not surprising to find that they're emboldened by the petty crimes to now commit much more extreme violence.
The escalation of Judith and Alvin's deviant behavior breaks horrific new ground with the abduction and murder of Lisa Ann Milliken.
Why these acts turned into murder has to do with the continual effort to prove to each other that they are outlaws. So one act leads to another, but that next act must be somewhat worse. And then the next act, somewhat worse.
Rome and DeKalb County authorities suspect that their recent crime spree is just the beginning. In the fall of 1982, authorities in Georgia and Alabama are on the lookout for 18-year-old Judith Neely and her husband, 29-year-old Alvin Neely, who are suspects in a series of crimes, including arson and murder.
What sets the case of Alvin and Judith Ann Neely apart is that she seemed to be more of the instigator than we typically see in these teams.
On October 1st, the results come in from the evidence found near Lisa Ann Milliken's body. The blood on the jeans belongs to Lisa Ann Milliken, but the jeans are too large to belong to Lisa, so police assume they are the killers. The substance in the syringe is found to be made up of sodium, hydroxide, and hypochlorite, the main ingredients in liquid drain cleaner. The autopsy on Lisa Ann Milliken only confirms the authorities' worst fears.
Lisa had been tortured prior to her murder by the injection of liquid drain cleaner into her neck, into her arms, and into both buttocks.
The autopsy also reveals that Lisa Ann Milliken was sexually assaulted. Authorities realize they are dealing with an extremely vicious pair of criminals and are determined to get them off the street before they strike again. Reports come into the Rome Police Department on October 3rd regarding a woman matching Judith Neely's description, who was accosting and attempting to pick up young women and girls.
We began to look at the attempted pickups, the attempted abductions, and it was pretty obvious to us at that point that we had the potential of a serial killer on the loose.
On the night of October 3rd, 26-year-old John Hancock and his fiancée, 22-year-old Janice K. Chapman, are walking home after visiting family.
The way Judith lures people into her car is by playing the small-town girl in a new town. She would come up to people and say that she was new in town and that she was friendless, and then she would invite those people to go riding with her in her car.
John and Janice believe Judith's story and take her up on her offer. The trio drives through the Georgia countryside.
During the course of the drive, she gets into contact with CB radio with someone who's called Night Rider. They begin to chat, and Judith says that she has some new friends in the car with her, and perhaps that all of them should meet.
Hey, John. Come here.
After they all meet up, they split up. John goes with Alvin, Janice goes with Judith. The decision is made to try to find some moonshine to liven things up for the evening, and they head out into a more deserted area to look for that.
Judith and Janice follow in the car behind.
During that ride, John needs to go to the bathroom. He asks Alvin to pull over, and Alvin does.
Judith shoots John Hancock, and the Neelys take off, with Janice K. Chapman, who was restrained in the car.
But John isn't dead. And after he knows they're gone, he gets up and he runs to the nearest road, flags down a passing car, still quite wounded, of course, and goes to the hospital.
John Hancock is treated for his wound and released.
He came to the wrong police department the next day. He came through the general investigative area where we were sitting, the squad room. We were playing back the tape of the phone call.
And you will find a body with a bullet in it.
And as he walked by, he heard the voice, and he stopped and turned around and he said, "That's her. That's the girl that shot me." At that point, we all sat down with Mr. Hancock and began to try to solicit as much information from him as we could.
John Hancock picks Judith and Alvin Neely out of a photo lineup.
At that point, our investigation turned to the point of, we've got them identified, now let's find them. We still had a victim, Janice Chapman, that had not been located. Our primary focus at that time was two things. Number one, we wanted to locate Janice Chapman, try to get her to safety. The other thing was to locate Alvin and Judy Neely and get them off the street.
In October of 1982, shooting victim John Hancock identifies Judith Neely and her husband, Alvin, as the people who shot him and kidnapped his fiancée. His fiancée, Janice Chapman, is still missing. Georgia and Alabama authorities, now joined by federal agents, aggressively search across several states for the Neelys and for Janice Chapman, who they hope to find before it's too late.
It was urgent. We got people running around Rome killing folks.
More than a week passes with no results. A nationwide APB is put out for Judith and Alvin Neely. And on October 14th, investigators finally get the break they've been looking for.
We contacted the authorities in Tennessee, the area that they were known to have been from, and were fortunate enough to find that Alvin and Judy were both in the Rutherford County Jail in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on some check charges, some forgeries, something totally unrelated to this. I think it was probably 4 or 5 carloads of us that drove up there, and then we divided into 2 search teams and went and searched the automobiles of Alvin and Judy Neely, and also the residence of Judy's mother, where they were in fact staying.
Among the items police find: guns, handcuffs, CB radios, motel receipts under a number of fake names, and the letters Judith wrote to Alvin from her days at the YDC. But there is no sign of Janice Chapman. Investigators turn their attention to Judith and Alvin Neely. Judith is interrogated first, hoping she'll tell them where to find Janice Chapman.
She was very cold, matter of fact, she showed absolutely no emotion. But Judy admitted that they had picked up Chapman and John Hancock. She admitted to walking him out into the woods, shooting him in the back, leaving him for dead. She went on to say that they carried Miss Chapman back to a motel there in Rome and killed her.
She shot her in the back, and then when she fell and was hollering, that was the word she used, Judy went over to her and put 2 more bullets in her head as she lay on the ground.
The disorganization of these murders suggests the childish minds who planned them. What happened may have been as simple as someone saying to someone else, Alvin to Judith or Judith to Alvin, well, real outlaws don't leave witnesses.
Judith doesn't deny her involvement in the death of Lisa Ann Milliken either.
She admitted that she'd picked Lisa Milliken up. They spent the night in a motel, that Alvin, in fact, joined them at that particular motel.
Judith watches as Alvin rapes Lisa Ann Milliken.
Judith Neely seemed to have a condition where someone gets excited at watching another person be violent. Judith Neely might have enjoyed watching her husband raped, either because she just liked to see that kind of violence against another woman, or because there was an element of self-hatred in it where she could envision herself as the woman being raped.
Judith Neely tried to kill Lisa 7 different times. She injected her 6 times with a solvent used to clean drains, but that didn't work. Time was passing, Judith grew impatient, and so finally she asked Lisa to stand up beside the edge of the canyon, and there she shot her in the back. After Lisa was dead, to Judith's surprise, she was still at the top of the canyon. And so Judith got down on her knees and pushed the body over the side. When that happened, she got her jeans bloody, and so she changed her jeans and threw those over the canyon wall. She also threw the syringes that she had used to inject Lisa over the side of the canyon.
For her to take the blame in this case, it certainly could be that she was so immature as to believe that these crimes really weren't that damaging and that it made her powerful and she enjoyed it.
Alvin Neely corroborates both accounts and provides police with the location of Janice Chapman's body. They find it exactly where he said it would be. She had been shot 3 times.
Alvin Neely gave me the impression of being a big old lapdog. IQ-wise, I would say she was double or triple him. I just felt like that she was extremely intelligent, and he felt like that well, I'm lucky to have this woman, you know, and so if I don't do what she says, she'll leave. But it was obvious to me that she was in charge.
Alvin admits to raping both Lisa Ann Milliken and Janice Chapman.
Alvin confessed to all of these activities, but in his confession, it was always his wife, Judith, who was the dominant party.
He claimed that Judith was in it for the sex, too. There was never any evidence of that. However, I think that the primary motive was this outrageous notion of being outlaws, that it was exceedingly important to really be bad people.
A question that we always ask when we're looking at team killers is, would they separately have had the propensity to be murderers? I think in terms of what we know about Alvin up to the point when they met, he showed no indication that he really was a killer. And yet with Judith, we certainly see that she's got that kind of anger. She follows through on revenge. She has agendas against people. He probably wouldn't have been a killer, but she probably would have been.
On October 16th, just over a month after their latest crime spree began, Judith and Alvin Neely are extradited to Alabama to face charges in the death of Lisa Ann Milliken. But authorities are about to discover that having the Neelys in custody doesn't guarantee an end to their outlaw ways. The month-long arson, kidnap, rape, and murder spree of 18-year-old Judith and 29-year-old Alvin Neely comes to an end with the couple's arrest in October of 1982. Judith confesses to the murder of 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken, taking full blame for the act and exonerating her husband.
We never had any evidence or proof that he committed a crime in our jurisdiction.
I think it was a power thing for Judy. She wanted to be in charge. She wanted to let somebody know that she had done it, and it was her way of saying, here I am.
But faced with a 3-count indictment of abduction with intent to harm, abduction with intent to terrorize and sexually violate, and murder, Judith applies for youthful offender status in hopes of avoiding a possible death sentence.
Had she been granted that status, her maximum punishment would have been 3 years only.
Taking Judith's past criminal history into account, as well as the shocking details of Lisa Ann Milliken's death, on December 17, 1982, the court denies the motion. Her trial is set for March 7, 1983. When the date arrives, a decidedly different Judith Neely shows up for court.
She had nice clothes on, and she had makeup, and her hair was done nicely, and I'm sure her attorneys thought that was what she should do, and if I had been them, I would have done the same thing.
When Judith takes the stand, the prosecution discovers that her look isn't the only thing to change.
When she was first arrested, she was very sure of herself. When it got to trial, she became very demure. She seemed to have a very introverted personality and tried to show all the signs of someone who might be brainwashed or coerced.
Judy had claimed that Alvin had made her do these things, that she had had no part in them other than to act as his zombie.
Typically in these situations, what happens is the most psychopathic person turns on the other fast so that they can throw the blame on that person.
Alvin Neely was portrayed by the defense as being this big, brutal guy who terrorized and brutalized his wife. Anybody who met Alvin Neely, which included myself, the investigators, anybody who ever had contact with him was immediately impressed by how inaccurate that description was. Once when she was testifying, she bent her head over and appeared to be crying. We'd never seen her cry before. I stopped the court and I asked the court to instruct her to lift her face, to lift her head. The court made her lift her head. There was total dry eyes, no crying, no tears, no nothing. Only through things like that could we show the real Judith Neely.
At 4:30 p.m. on March 21st, after 13 days of testimony, Judith's case goes to the jury. By 10:45 a.m. the next morning, the jury returns with a verdict: guilty on all 3 counts. They recommend a sentence of life in prison.
Under Alabama law in a death penalty case, the jury returns a verdict and recommends a punishment. The judge must make the final decision.
The judge rejects the jury's recommendation and sentences Judith Neely to death.
It was the judge's determination that if you couldn't execute Judith Neely in the state of Alabama for the crime of which she had been found guilty, you couldn't execute anybody.
The only time I ever saw true tears from her was when the court handed down the death sentence. Then she cried.
At the age of 18, Judith becomes the youngest woman ever sentenced to death.
I certainly walked away from the trial of that case with the feeling that justice had been served.
Judith is then sent to Georgia, where, along with Alvin, she faces charges in the abduction and murder of Janice Chapman and the kidnapping and attempted murder of John Hancock. Not wanting to risk another death sentence, Judith agrees to testify against Alvin in exchange for the state dropping the murder and attempted murder charges against her and allowing her to plead guilty to kidnapping.
Alvin was confronting very serious offenses, and if he confessed, then he would not be electrocuted.
Alvin pleads guilty to the kidnapping and murder of Janice Chapman and is sentenced to 2 life terms.
He simply chose to live in prison until the end of his days than to face the electric chair.
Judith is given a life sentence before being returned to Alabama's death row.
Years later, the governor of Alabama commuted her sentence to life. Not from death to life without parole, but from death to life. So the issue of parole will be something that will have to be faced in one way or another in the future.
On October 24th, 2005, while serving out his sentence, Alvin Neely dies from complications while undergoing surgery. Judith Neely will be eligible for parole in 2013 at the age of 49.
She's been in jail a long time, and she needs to stay in jail a long time.
She claims to have to be active in religious activity now, and that she's changed. But that's the same song that most people that go to jail sing. In my opinion, Judy Neely is probably one of the most dangerous women in 1982, and I think she probably still is today.
She could only go on what happened before. And what happened before makes no rhyme or reason within the bounds of human decency. And you had to expect that that would continue.
If somebody were to say, do you have any examples of a woman who really was a killer, a cold-blooded killer, she springs to mind pretty fast. Despite the fact that she may have a lower victim count, the aggression, the anger, the manipulativeness, and the cleverness of what she was doing does stand out. But I also think because Alvin was much older than her and much more experienced, had been to prison, had done a lot of the petty thefts, that he was probably the dominant partner in terms of how they got money, the fact that they ran around as much as they did, and so each had a part in how they operated.
There are certain relationships that simply combust into some kind of fiery element. And I think that's what happened in the case of Mr. and Mrs. Neely. And I believe that if they were to have met in a corridor or in a jail somewhere long after this trial, they would have shared a wink and a smile.